Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for braving the elements to come out here this morning. And welcome. My name is Steve Rubley. I'm Managing Director of the government segment of Thomson-Reuters. And personally, and on behalf of Thomson-Reuters, Ernie Allen, who's the President and CEO of the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children and co-chair of this effort, as well as John Villasenor with the Brookings Institution, and members of our Digital Economy Task Force. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Today, we're going to be discussing the digital economy, including virtual currencies, online anonymity, and the deep web. We're also going to discuss the role these technologies play in helping society, as well as enabling criminal activity, specifically child sexual exploitation and trafficking. So let me start out by saying these technologies, like technology in general, are neither good nor bad. If you're among the world's poor and unbanked, the digital economy offers financial tools, financial freedom. They allow you to participate in the economy, and if you're a political dissident or a journalist protecting a source, new anonymizing technologies allow you to work and communicate without the ability of the government to identify you. For instance, if you're living in a country with an oppressive government that doesn't allow access to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you could use Tor, or the Onion Router, to anonymously use these sites, stay in touch with the outside world, and your experiences with a significantly reduced risk of a run-in with the governmental authorities. Tor might keep you or source out of jail. It actually might keep you alive. But these very same technologies that allow anonymity and secrecy for journalists and dissidents and allow access to a modern economy to the poor in developing nations also provide those same benefits to the very worst among criminals. Technology can be a powerful enabler, not only for criminals, but also for law enforcement. Business that I run at Thomson-Reuters, for example, works with law enforcement to provide high-tech investigative resources to help them solve and even prevent crimes and stop criminals, including those that are innovating in the shadows. In our broader Thomson-Reuters business, we likewise work with financial institutions around the world to support their Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering efforts. Law enforcement officials also look to us to explore and become expert in breaking and future technologies that are available for criminals and that our government and law enforcement customers are encountering or may encounter in the years to come. In fact, our mission in our group is, in the government and law enforcement, is to look 5 years into the future and predict how criminals will be using technology, including digital currencies and online anonymity. So I'll just take a poll here. How many of you have actually explored the deep web? Have somebody shown you Silk Road? Anybody? A few folks. So for those of you who have, you've likely seen anonymity and virtual currencies at their worst. Murder for hire, a shopping mall for drugs, and most egregious of all, a massive global marketplace for child pornography and the sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. We saw that too. And as part of our work, we developed expertise around digital currencies, anonymity, and the deep web. So it was early last year that we met with Ernie Allen at the International Center to share what we were seeing at the time. And it was around this time last year. ICMEC was working on these same issues, and we spent the afternoon really comparing notes. And that's when really this whole thing got started with what we're talking about today. We organized a first-of-its-kind conference in June on digital economy in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And from there, we drew up a plan to pull together a team of experts to really explore the benefits and risks surrounding the digital economy from as many sides as possible. And that's really important here. We want to take a balanced view on this. And we wanted to provide recommendations on how to move forward by balancing the positive aspects, but also helping to reduce global illicit activity. So to that end, we formed the Digital Economies Task Force, both to educate the public and work collaboratively across stakeholder groups, including government agencies, law enforcement, corporations, academia, public, and nonprofit agencies, as well as key industry players. And that was what was really unique, is bringing the industry players into the conversation here. So Among the groups that are represented today from our task force, we have, of course, John Villaseñor. We have Kate Friedrich in the audience, Thomson-Reuters. Don Codling, retired FBI and a cyber criminal expert. And we have Jason Thomas as well from Thomson-Reuters today. So thank you for attending. So we held our first meeting with the task force last August, and from there we developed these working groups to address child exploitation, regulation, and then interagency coordination and law enforcement. From the beginning, our approach was to take a balanced view, and that's very important, both the advantages and the disadvantages surrounding the digital economy, a place where people can enjoy the convenience of digital currencies, but where there are controls in place like any other form of money. And I think we've really been true to that with what with the group that we put together. Our chief goal in creating our task force, which is the digital economy, potential, perils, and promises, is to inform policymakers, financial institutions, law enforcement, and others about the current state of the digital economy. It's our hope that these groups will further explore the inherent opportunities and the risks associated with an increasingly digital economy and its effect on human rights, regulation, crime, and law enforcement. Our recommendations, which Ernie Allen and Task Force Vice Chair John Villaseñor will discuss in more detail, will include a regulatory framework that fosters the growth of the digital economy while addressing anonymizing technology and the growth of deep web marketplaces that enable illegal commerce. Those activities including illegal commerce, money laundering, narcotics, weapons, stolen goods, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation of children. In the conversation that we will have with lawmakers tomorrow, we'll focus on private and public sector efforts to continue research into the digital economy and illegal activities. We'll also discuss investment in law enforcement training, rethinking investigative techniques, and fostering cooperation between agencies. And then finally, promoting a national and global dialogue on policy. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ernie Allen, President and Chief Executive Officer of the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's really through Ernie's leadership that, even with his prior role at NECMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, has played a role in the recovery of 74,000 children, and NECMEC's recovery rate climbing from 62% in 1990 to 94% today. And he's also taken NECMEC's programs and services to a global audience. So today, the International Center, where Ernie is today, is building a global missing child's network that already includes 14 nations. An attorney in his native Kentucky, Ernie came to NECMEC after serving as Chief Administrative Officer of the Jefferson County Director of Public Health and Safety for the City of Louisville and Director of Louisville-Jefferson County Crime Commission. I'm personally proud to have worked with Ernie for so many years. I'm a longtime admirer, respect everything he's done for society and what he's done to recover children globally. I'm delighted we're working with him in this important project, and I'd like to now turn it over to Ernie. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Oh, get out of the way here. No, thank you, Steve, and let me add that we're honored to be your partner. Your leadership and Thomson-Reuters' leadership in addressing this issue has been extraordinary. I'm sure many of you are asking, why is the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children playing a leading role in addressing issues related to the digital economy? Obviously, from one perspective, we are very interested in advancing the social welfare, the social good of children and families around the world. But the other, as Steve pointed out, is that this is really central to our mission at the center, because this is an issue that is impacting the lives of children everywhere. A decade ago, we helped to convene a financial coalition against child pornography. Today, there are coalitions operating on 3 continents. In North America alone, there are 34 companies. The premise was that the exploitation of children, that the problem of child pornography was being facilitated by the mainstream payment system. People were purchasing child pornography, commercial child pornography, and using their credit cards. A leading international economic research institution called commercial child pornography a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so what we sought to do was to end that, to follow the money, to shut down the accounts, to stop the payments. Just last year, a leading expert sent us an email saying that the problem, which had been a multi-billion-dollar industry, had declined to, quote, effectively zero, less than $1 million a year. We resisted the temptation, however, to call a press conference and declare victory. And the reason was we didn't believe it. So for the past year and a half, I've been consulting with law enforcement leaders around the world and with financial experts, and our friends at Thomson-Reuters had been doing the same thing on a parallel track. A clear consensus emerged, and that consensus was we didn't end it, we just moved it. That what was happening was a migration of child pornography, sexual exploitation, trafficking, and other criminal enterprises into this new, unregulated, unbanked digital economy. There are three primary reasons. The first is internet anonymity. The second is that this is an economy that belongs to no nation and is overseen by no central bank. The third is that many countries have yet to begin to apply existing laws and regulations to non-fiat digital currencies at the exchange level, the point at which they're traded for fiat currencies, dollars, euros, pounds, yen. When we joined with Steve and Thomson-Reuters to create this task force, our goals were very basic. We wanted to create a reasonable, balanced, effective set of solutions. And we recognize that the pace of innovation is going to quicken, that there will be new currencies and new technologies born of the ones that exist today, and that the intensity of the effort to achieve total internet anonymity is going to increase. Nonetheless, we felt the pressure to act now. Dr. Villaseñor will present the framework of our recommendations to the Congress and to governments around the world. However, there are four underlying premises for our recommendations. The first is that this is a global phenomenon. Digital economy funds move network to network, not nation to nation, and that this is a problem that the United States or any other government or, in fact, government alone can solve. It requires global cooperation and global leadership. Second premise was that draconian regulation is not the answer and is, in fact, counterproductive. We have to be careful to ensure that the response of governments to this fragile, emerging, high-risk but high-reward new area is not so aggressive that the effect is simply to push these new enterprises into countries or regions where there's little or no regulation. The third premise is that there are existing laws and existing regulatory structures that can and should be utilized, focusing on the exchanges as money services businesses. The focus should be at the point where digital currencies are exchanged for conventional currencies. And we're encouraged that this has begun to happen, at least in the United States, as evidenced by recent high-profile cases involving these exchanges. FinCEN in the United States has led these efforts, but to date, few other countries are doing the same. We're committed to change that. And fourth and finally, that the central challenge, as Steve so articulately pointed out, is internet anonymity. We recognize the high-minded and noble purpose behind new anonymizing tools, including, as he pointed out, protecting political dissidents and journalists. The problem, however, is that dissidents and journalists are not the only ones using these tools. There is an emerging deep web or dark web, in which users employ anonymizing tools and pay for their illegal transactions in non-fiat digital currencies. Our argument is that there's a difference between privacy and anonymity. Obviously, we need to maximize individual privacy. However, we simply cannot create an environment in which traffickers and child exploiters can operate on the internet with no risk of being identified unless they make a mistake. Those are our underlying premises. That is what motivated our report, and those are the challenges that we face in tackling this incredibly diverse, complex problem. Now I'm pleased to introduce the man whose difficult task it was to assimilate the complex product created by all of our working groups and turn it into a logical, coherent report. He is a non-resident senior fellow of the Brookings Institution, and he is a professor of electrical engineering and public policy at UCLA. I'm honored to introduce the vice chair of the task force, Dr. John Villaseñor.
Thank you all very much for coming today, and thank you, Mr. Allen and Mr. Rubley, for setting the context here. We all know how dramatically technology has altered the capability to gather and exchange information in recent years, and we all know that these capabilities, in addition to bringing innumerable benefits, can be misused as well. So the report that we've released today helps to address a challenge that any reasonable person would view as vitally important. How can we foster the many benefits that today's information technologies can offer while simultaneously preventing those same technologies from being misused to exploit children? We don't claim to have all the answers to this question, but we hope that the report being released today will frame the dialogue in a way that both here in the United States and globally will enable us to come up with some of those answers. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes walking through the structure of what's in the report. At a high level, and Mr. Rubley alluded to this earlier, the report is divided into several sections. We've got a section on law enforcement, a separate section on regulation, and another section on interagency coordination. Of course, the report begins with an introduction that frames the challenge, and most fundamentally moving forward, the report contains about 15 specific recommendations for action that can be taken to help address and resolve these challenges. So the report opens by identifying and framing the challenge that we're trying to address. It includes a discussion of digital information technologies generally, as well as their potential to confer anonymity, both generally and online. And it recognizes that while anonymous free expression is protected under our Constitution, those protections have limits. It uses examples from recent law enforcement investigations to convey some of the different ways in which information technologies, and in particular anonymizing information technologies, can be misused and have been misused in the exploitation of children. A recommendation stemming from this overall framing is that we conduct rigorous, validated studies of this problem, quote, so that resources can be directed towards reducing the victimization of children as effectively as possible with measurable results. The remainder of the report discusses the three topic areas I mentioned a moment ago: law enforcement, regulation, and interagency coordination. Law enforcement has the extremely challenging job of identifying and locating perpetrators of crimes against children in an era when the perpetrators are armed with an increasingly sophisticated set of digital tools designed specifically to make them hard to locate and identify. To adapt, law enforcement agencies will need to alter their investigative methods, introduce new training programs, and conduct research to better understand the nature of criminal activities involving the so-called deep web. That section on law enforcement has 5 recommendations, which I won't read in their entirety, but 2 representative examples are: first, to determine if there are methods accessible to law enforcement that could be used based on probable cause and appropriate legal process to overcome criminal misuse of anonymizing tools. Second, to promote and facilitate international law enforcement coordination, information sharing, and cooperation, much along the lines of what Mr. Allen just identified. The next section of the report discusses regulation. There are multiple philosophies regarding the role of financial regulation broadly, as well as in the specific context of what are sometimes called cryptographic or non-fiat digital currencies like Bitcoin. We don't claim to resolve all of the philosophical approaches that one could discuss with respect to regulation, but we do provide some framing in line, again, with what Mr. Rubley and Mr. Allen were talking about that can help address the question. We specifically talk about some of the key developments in relation to regulation of non-fiat digital currencies, in particular FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network guidance offered or issued in the last year. The report recommends that regulation, in addition to that, regulation should be done through a risk-based approach, identifying areas of illicit finance and weighing those against the potential benefits of the digital economy. The report also recommends further clarification from FinCEN with respect to non-fiat digital currencies, as well as explicit guidance from the IRS on tax compliance. Current regulatory guidance, existing regulatory guidance, has certainly helped, at least in this country, to clarify the landscape, but there are still many questions, and of course there are still many jurisdictions where the clarity is still could be improved. The final section of the report addresses interagency collaboration within the United States, as well as some of the international engagements that the United States government entities are engaged with other countries. It describes, for example, the various roles and interactions of the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, State, and the Treasury in addressing crimes associated with the digital economy. It discusses international education and training programs, many involving the departments or organizations I just named. It also discusses international engagements, including with organizations such as Interpol. It recommends, among other things, that interagency resources should be dedicated for the purposes of better understanding the mechanisms of new payment systems and new money movements in order to identify specific risk points, establish indicators of potential illicit activities, and to develop mitigation strategies for interagency use and deployment. In closing, I'll mention that the report also contains a glossary of terms that all of us are seeing more often these days: cryptocurrency, digital currency, the deep web, virtual currency, and so on. And their goal there is to try to have some common ground so that when we encounter and use these terms, there's increased clarity regarding what these terms are actually referring to. So I'll close by thanking you again for taking the time to come to this event on this most important of topics, and stating that Mr. Allen, Mr. Rubley, and I would welcome the chance to respond to any questions you may have. Any questions?
If not, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Great job.